Confession time. I consider myself a Trekkie first and foremost, but to my shame, I have to confess that up until last month, I had never seen the animated series. And boy, I regret that. I had a real good time watching it. As a valued member of the Cat put it, they're warm and comfy viewings. I couldn't agree more. This is the Review of Champions, and I'm your host, Grandmaster. With me is a powerful panel made up of the finest champions Shakar has to offer. Let me introduce them to you. First up, voice only back for this episode of the Star Trek Project, Mr. Lord Death Man. How are you?
I'm doing great today. Thanks for asking.
Hmm. Uh, Welcome back. Showing his beautiful face on camera with an evil goatee that keeps growing, Merv. How are you, man?
Fantastic.
And last but certainly not least, Taylor. How are you, man?
I'm great.
That's good to hear. This is episode 4 of the Star Trek project, as I mentioned before, where we will be reviewing Star Trek. All of it in order of release, sort of. And today we're going to talk about Star Trek, the animated series. All 22 episodes for season 1 and season 2. But before we do, I want to ask you all to help us out. Like and share this video and subscribe to our channel. And if you really can't get enough of us, you can join our ranks. Go to sakar.freeforums.net. Set up an account, get to know us, and yes, you can join us in our reviews or podcasts. We would love to have you on the show. As mentioned before, we will be discussing the 22 episodes of season 1 and 2 of Star Trek, the animated series today. So let's get to it. And we will start with our brand new section called Grandmaster's Picks. And in Grandmaster's Picks, I get to pick 3 episodes or 4 or 2, whatever I want, because I'm the Grandmaster. And which I like particularly, and I will let the panel sound off on those first before they get to give you and me their picks. And this time I picked the following 3 episodes: Yesteryear, The Jihad, and Albatross. And I'm gonna give the floor to Mr. Lord Deathman first. You can sound off on these 3 episodes, Mr. Lord Deathman. Let's have it.
Where to start here?
Well,
Yesteryear.
yeah.
Yeah. So before I get into any commentary on these episodes, and I am going to try to make this quick. I have to say that I've watched the animated series many, many times, and I've tried to do the best that I can in terms of reconciling it with canon, and I think at the end of the day, what you have to do with the animated series is just kind of watch it and enjoy it for what it is. Um, that said, as the years have gone by, I've really, really grown to love Star Trek, the animated show. And I do wish it had gone on a bit longer. It's incredibly strange, unique. It's great to have the voices of all the older cast members there. But commenting on the episodes that you just started, like Yesteryear, I think that's probably every fan's favorite episode of Star Trek: The Animated Series. So it's incredibly unique in terms of how emotional it is. It wasn't just written as like a child's cartoon. It really felt like it was aimed at adults, and it really pulled me in right away. Um, the whole idea that Spock has to travel back through time to save himself from this fate and stop this paradox. It's an incredible episode. Is all I can really say about it, and I don't know that I can say anything more than a lot of other people have said about it. So I will go on to say, though, that as far as the contributions to canon, that's my favorite aspect of this episode in terms of introducing the Vulcan city of, I think it's Shakar, right, which we end up seeing in the the Star Trek the movie, the motion picture. I think the first one is where we actually end up seeing that, and just a lot of details about the Vulcan sort of rites of passage, which we end up seeing again in the 2009 Star Trek. So these animated shows are not to be taken lightly if you're a Star Trek fan and you haven't seen them, because they do really end up contributing a lot to the canon in general. So one, I mean, the Jihad, loved it. That's a really strange one because of all of the different aliens that are in that one, and I always thought that one straddled this really cool line of being for adults, but also kind of being for kids because it just had all these weird, colorful characters that you can't forget. Some of them which have made it into live action, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of some of those species. Not all of them, but yeah, and the overall plot. So I'm like, where did the whole idea of a jihad come from? Like, some writer just sat there. I guess something might have been going on in the Middle East, and they were like, you know what? I'm just going to write like a bottle cartoon episode about an interstellar jihad. That I mean, today that would be seen as pretty volatile stuff in terms of how it could be politicized and all of that. But someone slid it right in there into a Saturday morning child's cartoon. Totally awesome. So also just like the technology that gets featured there, the love interest for Kirk, I forget her name, but she was really making a case for the two of those for the two of them getting together.
Yeah.
But in any event, third one, I'm sorry, what was the third one you had mentioned?
Albatross.
Albatross, yes. Another cool one. So, you know, I think you've picked all of the episodes that every fan would pick, I think, as far as being classics of the genre or of that particular show. So I'm going to end it here by saying lots of love for that particular episode. Although nothing in particular really stands out about that one in terms of contributions to lore. I will say that I think that might be the episode where James Doohan did like the most. A little known fact about the show, I think James Doohan did like 90% of the voices. And as you get older and you're like, is that James Doohan doing the voice of the alien and of the lieutenant who's at the con and you know, some other stray character on it? But yeah, I enjoyed the voice work on that particular episode, and yeah, I will let the rest of the champion panel here get a chance to sound off about these episodes as well.
Okay, moving on to Taylor. Taylor, no doubt you have seen this show as many times as Lord Deathman or more, because as you mentioned last time we spoke, you actually saw it when it came out, and you were the how they say the intended target audience at the time. So, yeah, tell me, what did you think of these 3 episodes?
Yeah, I did get to watch the animated series on its original run on Saturday morning, and we'll talk more about that. But as far as these 3 episodes go, Yesteryear is fantastic. I love it because there's so many callbacks to the original series. In one of the original series episodes, I think it's the Journey to Babel, I think was the name of it, the one where all the ambassadors are on the ship. Spock's mother mentions the giant teddy bear with the fangs, and we get to see it in this episode in person. And of course, Mark Leonard comes back to voice Serac again. It's great that the show was able to get so many of the original actors to recreate their characters. And of course, they had to use the Guardian of Forever, the time portal from the City on the Edge of Forever, also in this episode. And I also thought it was really cool that when Spock was erased from the timeline, the first officer of the Enterprise was an Andorian character, who they didn't, they only touched on a very few times in the original series, Andorians. It was really not until Enterprise that we really explore Andorian culture. So I thought it was cool that they had a call out there of having an Andorian. So yeah, it's just a great episode all around. The other ones, next one was Jihad. Yeah, I love Jihad just because, like Lord Deathman said, they brought in so many outside characters for this team to steal this weapon or whatever it was, this artifact, to prevent a war from happening. And instead of using all the regular character crews to do it, they brought in all these unique alien species and these different characters, and I thought that was quite fun, actually. Albatross, I thought, was also a good episode. I thought it was a very serious episode because, Bones was being charged for causing a plague on a planet years before, which of course he never intended to do, or had no ill intent whatsoever. But it was a pretty serious situation set up there, which is one of the great things about this whole series, of course. Y'all know classic television is one of my hobbies, and of course the subset of that is the golden age of Saturday morning TV. And at the time, there were many producers of Saturday morning TV, but the big three were Sid and Marty Krofft, Hanna-Barbera, and Filmation. And Star Trek, the animated series, was made by Filmation, and Filmation was known for delivering the goods at a very low price, which is why the animation in this show is very frugal, to put it nicely. It's really cheap animation, but the writing, they lucked out with the writing by getting a lot of writers from the original series, including DC Fontana and others. So even though the show, the animation is what it is, it's the absolute bare minimum, but the writing really keeps it alive. And again, a lot of the writing is almost as good as in the original series. And real quick, there's another show that was on at the time on Saturday mornings, a Sid and Marty Krofft show called Land of the Lost, which, by the way, DC Fontana, Larry Niven, and David Gerrold, who all wrote Star Trek episodes, also wrote episodes for Land of the Lost. And Walter Koenig, Chekhov himself, wrote an episode for Land of the Lost, which is another actually good science fiction show for kids. I'll talk about other stuff as we go on. But yeah, that's my thoughts on those three episodes. I think they're all really good.
Yeah, actually, Walter Koenig didn't appear as Chekhov in the animated series, but he did write episodes, one episode of the animated series. So he was involved, even though his character Chekhov was not in the show. Merv, you are a first-time watcher of Star Trek. You took upon this Herculean task to watch along and dive into this vast universe. And we only just tiptoed, so buckle up, boy. But how did you see the animated series for the first time? Like me, did you enjoy it as well as me? And these three episodes in particular, what were your thoughts and feelings?
Oh yeah, just a couple general thoughts. I don't think I touched on it with the original series, but the 55-minute runtime of the episodes in the original series sometimes was a bit daunting. So here, where it's, I guess, more geared towards kids and it gets out a little bit faster, where it was like 25 minutes to a half an hour runtime, that was a little bit more digestible, and I think probably, arguably, even a better entry point into the Star Trek universe than the original series, just especially if it's a kid, I don't know if Taylor feels the same way since he actually was a kid, and this sounds like it was your entry point to it. But anyway, I thought that was like just a good. It just made it a little bit easier to get into than I think my initial push on the original series, where some episodes are great, but other episodes weren't. And I just really enjoyed all these stories, but the three in particular that you mentioned, Yesteryear, probably, I think, maybe even easily the most emotional episode of the animated series. I mean, when it comes down to it, it's essentially Spock saving himself but sacrificing his dog, essentially. So it was kind of sad, towards the end. I really like anytime we get more of like Spock's world or culture or just the Vulcans in general so far up to this point, and I assume we'll probably learn more, or I'll learn more as the seasons or series goes on and stuff like that. But up till right now, like, it's really cool to see the different, even as a kid, where he's like conflicted between his Vulcan and human urges, I guess you'd say, like his desire to be more restrictive like the Vulcans and in control, but then his human side is just like animalistic and punching people in the face. So I thought that was a really fun little look at like child Spock there. And of course, his I can't remember his pet's name, but his pet was great. R.I.P. his dog. But yeah, Yesteryear was good. The Jihad was probably one of my, if it wasn't my favorite episode of the animated series, it was probably my second favorite episode of the animated series. It just hit me as like quintessential Saturday morning adventure cartoon to me. Like group of characters, it's just ragtag group of characters, just goes on a quest, and we don't really need a whole lot of character growth or anything. They're just in it for the fight. And then at the end of the episode, either good things happen or bad things happen, and sometimes you lose people along the way. It just really reminded me of like watching cartoons on Saturday morning, like more so than all the other episodes. I don't know what it was about it. Maybe the ragtag group of people getting together and all the different like strengths and weaknesses and seeing if they can pull it off and stuff like that. But I just had a blast watching that episode. I thought it was really fun. And Albatross, it was good. It probably wasn't up on my top 3 or anything, but the one thing that really stuck out to me was McCoy in particular. Like whenever he's confronted with this genocidal accusation, he didn't immediately go, well, there's no way I could do that. Like he actually thought to himself, like, what if I did cause this? And I thought that was a really interesting take from him, especially because he's always been like a little bit more of an emotional character as opposed to like I could see him easily going, what? And getting all outraged and wanting to punch somebody in the face for it. But it was a different step, maybe because it was closer to like his doctor, career and like responsibility in his profession. Like, I feel like it really pulled like a serious vibe out of him that, not to say he's not serious, but more of like a thoughtful, moment for him, reflecting on what if he did cause this. And I actually think that maybe it would have been an more interesting take if there was some reason, not obviously that he's out there maliciously causing genocides via plagues, but maybe that there was some thing that he overlooked that inevitably caused like a sickness on this planet, as opposed to just the space cloud or whatever it wound up actually being. But I did like the colors in it. So I forget the color sequence of sick people, green, yellow, red, or whatever it was, but I thought that was pretty fun. Yeah, very good episodes overall.
If it was Iconian, it would be red, amber, blue. But anyway, that's an inside joke. But if you're attracted, But anyway, Taylor, is there any particular episode you would like to discuss?
Yeah, there's one I would just like to mention. It was the slaver weapon.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a very interesting episode, and it was very interesting to me because it has this species called the Zinti, if I'm pronouncing that right, these cat-like aliens. And the episode was written by Larry Niven, who wrote a series of novels called Known Space, which are not related to Star Trek, but this same species, these Zintis, are in those novels. So he brought his creation into the Star Trek universe when he wrote an episode of the animated series. And I kind of wish they could bring the Zinti back into Star Trek at some point, because I thought they were pretty interesting. And I had read only one of the Known Space novels once a long time ago, and while I was reading it, I kept saying to myself, wait a minute, this is the species from Star Trek, the animated series. Did they steal this from Star Trek? What's going on here? Well, now, of course, I know the actual truth. But it was very interesting. The weapon, the MacGuffin of the episode, this weapon that could become any weapon at any time, I thought was a pretty interesting thing. It was sort of a doomsday weapon, a twist on the doomsday weapon type story. And I love that Uhura and Sulu both had pretty large roles in this episode, along with Spock, and how they were on a planet with no atmosphere, but they had a very cheap way of animating a life support system. They just kind of drew a line around the characters. I've got my life support turned on now, but it was cool. But anyway, just for those reasons, I found that episode always stuck in my head.
Actually, those spacesuits reminded me of the Guardians of the Galaxy spacesuits.
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
They have about the same vibe to it. But anyway, Merv, do you have a particular episode you would like to discuss?
I do. I also just want to tail up on, um, sorry, brain fog. Mention the slaver weapon was probably my favorite episode of this season, or this series, I guess, since it was only like a season and a half. To the point where whenever I was done watching it, I was so interested in everything about it that I looked up and actually saw that it was based on a novel or a short story, and actually plan on reading at least some of this just to see, if it's a sci-fi writer that I would enjoy, because I just really enjoyed that episode a lot. But so a lot of my very favorite episodes were actually already taken. So I went with the Hamburger Settlement, which was still pretty far up there for me, which is essentially just, they go to a water-based planet, and Spock and Kirk wind up there for like 5 days after a sea serpent attack. And whenever they find them 5 days later, they're face down in the water. And my mind went, oh, they're dead. Because why wouldn't they be? They're face down in the water. And then you see the webbed fingers and the gills, and turns out they turned into fishmen for an episode. And so that was really fun. The thing that stuck out probably the most was the color palette. Like there's like this green water, and like the land is like super red and dry looking. And it was just really cool combination of colors. And of course, there's a whole underwater species on this planet called the Aquans, I think, that are, kind of your stereotypical, humanoid fish people with their own culture and problems between elders and youngers. And some of them want to be left alone, and the other ones are like, no, we should actually like get to know these people and help others, and be a known entity in the universe. And I just thought that was a really interesting, like immediately, just within like a couple of seconds, you can tell what this culture is all about, like where their problems are, I guess. And of course, there is an attractive fish woman that, I was just waiting for Kirk, maybe because it was kind of a children's television show that nothing happened, but, just waiting for it. But yeah, I really enjoyed this episode. I thought it was a fun, like, undersea adventure that probably, some of the episodes more than others really highlight the ability to do a lot more with animation than you could get away with live action. And I think that this was one of them where it doesn't come off as, as cheesy, or as, you wouldn't have as many restrictions if you tried to do this in the live action version as opposed to the animated version. I think it works a little better that way.
Taylor, before I go to Lord Deathman, you had a follow-up.
Yeah, actually, Merv said exactly what I was going to say. I was just going to say how that episode is such a great example of how they were able to do stuff in the animated series that they could no way have done at that time in the live action series, all the underwater stuff and the sea serpents and all that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. That thought occurred to me many times throughout the series, that they did a lot of cool stuff that they couldn't have done in live action at the time. Lord Deathman, I also asked you to pick a favorite episode or two from the series to discuss with us. So let's have it.
Sure. I have to start this by saying that I also would have picked the slaver weapon. So it's just that good of an episode. I remember the first time I saw it, the impression that I had was I immediately wanted to watch it again. But unfortunately, it was just kind of in reruns. So it wasn't like you could, this slightly before DVR and all that kind of stuff. But the slaver weapon is excellent. But also in my top 5, I would have to say is an episode called The Infinite Vulcan, which was written by Walter Koenig. And as you mentioned, Grandmaster Walter Koenig did not get a chance to participate in a performance level in the animated series. I'm not really sure why that is. I'd imagine it was budgets, or they just couldn't afford to get the entire original cast back. But for whatever reason, it's a bit of a missed opportunity. It would have been nice to have him there, but I was so happy to find out that he was able to contribute by writing this particular episode. So good on them for giving him this opportunity. But a quick plot synopsis for this wild and crazy episode. of Star Trek the animated series is that I believe it's Captain Kirk, Spock, Sulu, and possibly McCoy that visit this planet, and they're conducting like routine scientific investigations. And they encounter like this really peaceful but highly advanced plant-based life forms. I think they're called the Phylosians or something like that. But in any event, everything seems to be going according to plan until Spock is kidnapped by a giant clone. Like, okay, this is like incredibly random for this to be happening. And the whole thing about the clone is that it is a callback to the eugenics wars of the 20th century in the Earth, sort of a Star Trek timeline. So it was nice to get that callback too from the original series. But anyway, the scientist that went ahead and ended up kidnapping Spock, I think his name is Caniculus. It's something that was kind of Roman or Latin sounding, Caniculus 4 or Caniculus 5. But without drawing this out too much, Caniculus clones Spock and makes a giant clone of the first officer of the Enterprise, which it blew my mind at the time. I was a younger lad watching this, and I'm like, wow, there really is. This would have been really hard to do on the live action show. But we had two giant clones by the end of this episode. And, even though this just sounds like random, story elements happening, they still managed to bring this back to, themes of like ethics and science and talking about how knowledge can be used for peaceful purposes. There's a point, the central conflict of this episode is that in the process of creating the giant Spock clone, our Spock is kind of brain dead or comatose because all of his knowledge has been transferred to the giant Spock. But giant Spock, still being Spock and who he is, decides to save our Spock by putting his little finger on his forehead and doing a mind meld. My thoughts to your thoughts. I love that part of it. It really just warms me up inside to even think about it. But he saves Spock with this mind meld, bringing our Spock back to life. And then there's a little bit of an ethical debate, about individuality and who's the real Spock. And, Caniculus's plan was to take these exceptional minds and turn them into giant clones and then have them become some kind of advanced police force for the entire galaxy. So there's a lot to get from this episode is what I'm trying to say. And it all ends in a peaceful solution, which, again, I think that's unique within the Star Trek kind of franchise. So the Infinite Vulcan is definitely one of my favorites for a lot of different reasons. But just because it's just incredible fun, and it also had this really cool message behind it, and Walter Koenig got to write it. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all good reasons. Yeah, overall, I really enjoyed this whole series. I do have a question for the panel, though. We didn't get Chekhov, but we did get two characters reoccurring on the bridge. So I'm going to ask a question which has been asked many times, but when do we get a live-action Eric's and Embrace? Taylor, you have any thoughts on that?
I love those two characters. I wish to heck we would get them in live action. I believe, and I can't remember which one's which, the three-armed guy. His species shows up in Lower Decks, at least. I know that. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if it's ever shown up in live action. And the cat woman girl, she's great too. I don't know why they haven't done those in live action, because they have more than enough technology. Mm-hmm. And they've had perfect opportunities. Like, for example, the J.J. Abrams 2009, they invented a whole bunch of never heard of species for that series, when they could have used all these species that had already existed in the universe. But yeah, I would love to see those two, or at least those, not necessarily the characters, but at least those species come back.
Yeah, we're going to discuss the current state of Star Trek in a bit. Lord Death Man, you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I loved Eric's and I love MRS's characters. I think all of the fans really do. And Taylor's absolutely right. we've had a lot of just random new species show up across all these movies and TV shows without any representation. So, instead of doing like this Star Trek Generations campaign or Star Trek Legacy or whatever it is, the new show the fans want, we need an MRES and Arix campaign so that they can be done in some live action show, even if it's just a walk on for them to do a couple of lines. Very recently, I didn't know who did the voice. I was pretty sure it was Michelle Barrett who did the voice of Emrys, the cat lady.
Yeah.
Lieutenant. And I was like, who did Eric's? And then I go to IMDb, and sure enough, it was James Doohan. And I was like, I would have never known had I looked it up because he did such a different, high pitched voice for that character. So
James Doohan was really great at accents. If you look throughout his acting career, by the way, he wasn't Scottish. He was Canadian, so his whole voice on Star Trek was not his real accent. But he was able to do many accents.
Yeah, and do like a lot of great voices. It seemed like he was their go-to guy whenever they had a voice that was outside of cast, except for some of the notable guest stars that they brought on, like Sarek and so forth from the original story to do voice work. But just had a pleasant surprise, not but a couple of weeks ago, just saying, "Oh, who did do the voice of Arix?" And there you go, they got James to do it again.
Well, Merv, are you disappointed to hear you won't get to see these two characters in live action on your track?
A little bit. So my first note when I started watching the animated series was, wow, Chekhov really let himself go. And it's funny, like, well, I don't know if it's funny, but when I was looking in, because I don't know, everyone probably does this, but when you watch something, you start looking into behind the scenes and stuff like that, or at least I do. And I guess initially they weren't even going to have at least the actual voice actor, characters for Uhura and Sulu. I can't remember. I'm having a brain fart if I'm saying Uhura's name right. But I guess Leonard Nimoy had to fight to get them to actually portray their characters in the series. So I wonder if they have even replaced those two characters with two other, maybe a fish man and a squid person or something. I don't know.
No. That last part is Star Wars. You're confusing your stars now.
That would be a real crossover.
Yeah, well, that will never happen. I can tell you.
Take the Enterprise right into a trap, I tell you.
Although there is a YouTube video where the Enterprise D will encounter the Death Star, but that's a different story. But anyway.
I did think that those characters did get a fair amount of screen time, surprising. Like they could have just made them background extra, animated things and just never really gave them anything to do other than just look the part. But they actually had, they were around in a couple episodes.
Yeah. So, if Alex Kurtzman, and now we're gonna go talk about an article that Variety cooked up last week or this week. I don't know. Lord Deathman will have the details on that. But they went to visit the Star Trek set of Strange New Worlds, and they made a whole article about the state of Star Trek as it is right now. Where is the franchise at the moment? They did do a quick history of it, especially troubles they have. It feels a little bit like they are trying to, justify what they are doing at the moment, because no matter what, it's a bit controversial. Soon we will get Discovery Season 5. Which is, a show that is divisive, to say at least. And, a whole article about it. And basically they say in that article that the Star Trek fandom is small, not as big as it is for Marvel or Star Wars, which is true. And it's aging, and they, with their new shows, and the upcoming Section 31 streaming movie, they try to appeal to a younger audience to get a new fans in. But they try to respect the older fans. That's basically the gist of it, if I give a good summary of that. Since Mr. Ward Deathman posted this article on the board, at least in our secret studio section, I didn't say that. I let him talk first.
Sure.
What were your thoughts on this article?
Yeah. I had a lot of thoughts on it. And first off, what really drew my attention to this article is that the cover for Variety had a Star Trek insignia on it, really big. And they asked the bold question, does Star Trek still matter? And it's something that kind of gave me pause for a minute. I was like, I'd like to stress test this and really think about it. This is a franchise that's like nearly 60 years old. And I admit that I am a part of the older generation of fans that liked a lot of the stuff, especially the things that came out in the late 80s and the 90s on television. I don't know that modern Star Trek for the most part resonates with me, but I know that I would still rather see Star Trek than not see it. And I think one of the things that makes Star Trek so unique and different from, say, Star Wars or from Marvel or from all these other franchises is really two things. It's and I hate, I'm gonna sound elitist when I speak of myself and my fellow Star Trek fans, but it is thinking man's science fiction. I'm sorry. It's not necessarily about, sword fights and the new age, the force, the light side, dark side. It's not always about a brother and sister fighting over something and then deciding who gets to rule the galaxy. I love Star Wars, so please, Star Wars fans, don't dox me and assassinate me in my home. But I think that Star Trek has always sort of aspired to get fans thinking about certain things and aspects of the world. The second thing about Star Trek is that Star Trek has never had a large audience and has always been on the brink of being irrelevant. They were about to cancel the show in the 60s. We had a good run of shows in the 90s, and then suddenly it all went away at the end of Enterprise. So Star Trek was kind of born in danger, and it's always been the fans that have bought it back from the brink. When we say, look, we're going to be there, we're going to see these shows, and fan writing campaigns, letter writing, whatever it is we have to do, this is really a fandom that is driven by the people who consume the actual stories. And I totally love that about this franchise. So when I read this article and I went through what Kurtzman is planning and what they're doing and what's going on with the studio, a lot of it is kind of stuff you know already about what's going on. And a lot of it is white noise in terms of people just trying to make what they're doing sound a little bit more important and relevant. But again, the central question, is it still relevant? Does it matter anymore? Does anyone want to see any Star Trek? Like, does the younger generation care about this stuff? Do they just think that I'm going to keel over and die of a heart attack and never buy another Star Trek Blu-ray again? It's a really big question, especially and this I want to go into in terms of looking at modern sci-fi today, right? There's this and very quickly on Netflix right now, there's a television show called Three Body Problem, which is based on a series of books. The Three Body Problem. I forget the names. I read all the books and I forget the names of them. Death's End, but anyway, the whole series revolves around the idea that space is a dark forest and that intelligent life on the different planets within our galaxy are better off never contacting each other, because in doing so, you immediately have to destroy the world that found out your location. This is really the premise of this entire. I encourage you to read it. It's very intelligent, very smart, based on some real science that's out there in the world and game theory and game mechanics. But that world of the three-body problem, that kind of mythology, there could never be a world like Star Trek there, because no one would ever get together to meet as aliens from different civilizations to come together in this new coalition, because we'd all be just sending like faster than light speed projectiles to each other's planets and blowing them up the minute we discovered them through some radio signal or whatever that may be. And it's just such a pessimistic and dark vision. And that's where science fiction is going today. And you'll get it in a lot of other franchises too, right? That are too cool for school, that have borrowed some new theories from speculative science, and are like, yeah, we're all going to die, and it's real pessimist, and society's never going to advance, and we're never going to reach utopia. That's like the prevailing narrative. But Star Trek means so much to me because it is not like that at all. It is very optimistic. It tells you about a future of cooperation. It tells you about us getting past all of our differences. So when I look at all this journalism here that says that Star Trek, is teetering on the edge once again, and it has bad leadership, and the studio's making bad decisions, or whatever you took away from this lengthy article, I wanted to take this time to tell people who are listening to this podcast right now and who are Star Trek fans, Star Trek is worth your time, and it absolutely has to stick around, because there's nothing like it in the world of science fiction. So that is my rant and my takeaway from the article.
Yeah, that's it. Taylor, you read it? What do you think?
I agree with most of what Lord Deathman said. 100%. As far as, is Star Trek gonna stick around? Well, as long as there's a Paramount, at least, because right now it's the most valuable thing that Paramount owns. And the desperate search in today's world for content to put on all of our various media and get people to subscribe to and watch, they're not going to shut down their biggest franchise that they own. On the contrary, I see so many dead franchises being brought back to life, all across the streaming and movie universe now. They're making a new Highlander. Oh, yay. The first one was great. Everything after sucked, but we're going to try again.
Yeah, there should only be one.
Exactly. There's a reason they wrote it that way. But Star Trek's biggest enemy is itself. It's the people in charge. Every property is only as good as the people that are writing and editing and producing the content. And I think a lot of the people producing the Star Trek stuff now have the problem that Lord Deathman referenced. They want everything to be dark. They're losing in some cases, not in all, but they're losing in some cases the core of what Star Trek is. One, they want it to be dark, and two, they want it to be Star Wars. They want it to be action, lightsaber, space battles all the time, and it doesn't have to be. Now, why was Star Trek created without all that stuff? Well, because they couldn't afford all that stuff. Okay, it was out of necessity. So all they could do was write really good stuff that didn't have all that expensive stuff in it. So necessity is the mother of invention, and it created a great franchise. But now again, there's so many. It seems like everyone working in Hollywood now is just, like Lord Deathman was talking about, these pessimistic, self-hating humanoids who can't bring themselves to say we're going to do something right someday, or we're going to have a happy ending after we overcome our challenges. And there seems to be a lot of pull and tug, and then there's just bad writing. It's like written by children sometimes, as opposed to the science fiction for adults that Lord Deathman talked about. Where the people get into childish arguments with each other on the bridge of the starship, and they're all hissy, and then they're all snarky towards each other, and they all talk like they're from Southern California in 2023 instead of being from the 23rd century or whatever they're supposed to be. And again, that's just weak writing at times. So those are the challenges they face. But like I said, the good news is they're still making money. And here's another thing, the writers, people doing all this stuff. And I know, I was at a Comic-Con once, and the guy who played Tuvok in Voyager was speaking, and he made a very, very brilliant point. He said that every time a new iteration of a franchise is created, it's never aimed at the old fans. It's always aimed at creating new fans, which is fine, but maybe the new fans want the same thing that the old fans liked. Because I watch a lot of reaction videos of very young people watching Star Trek, the original series, and Star Trek, the Next Generation for the first time on YouTube, and they seem to be loving it. Young, diverse people seem to be loving the same thing that I loved when I was 12 years old. Right. So maybe if you did more of the same, make it bigger, make it better, sure. But maybe young people will like it too.
Oh, people like good stuff. And I am already preparing for our October or November even episode where we do TNG season 1 and season 2. And I saw a video online the other day about a guy saying, yeah, Gene Roddenberry's vision never was really successful. I mean, the original series, meh. The motion picture, meh. The first 2 seasons of TNG, meh. And I was listening to this and I was like, what the hell are you talking about, man? Because I've been watching TNG season 1 and 2 in the recent weeks. I think it's freaking amazing, and it's just because it's good writing, good stories. It has something to say, and that is what people want. And they don't. I admit there's an audience for dumb, simple entertainment, but Star Trek has never been that, and should never be that. And what they're doing right now is too much directed at a fan base that isn't the Star Trek fan base, in my view. But that's my point of view. I don't say I hate it. Not even. We will get there in a few years, modern Trek, and I will give my view at that time. But I absolutely love what Gene Roddenberry wanted to do with Star Trek. That's my Star Trek, and what they're doing right now is not what I want from Star Trek. That's all I'm saying. Strange New Worlds come close, but it's not what I want. Before I go to Merv for his thoughts on the article, Lord Deathman had a follow-up.
And a really quick follow-up. I just want to say I wholeheartedly agree with both you and Taylor regarding not I don't have a vendetta against modern Star Trek, but I do have to agree with Taylor in terms of the level of writing being somewhat in decline. I still watch the modern stuff because I just won't turn away from my favorite franchise. But I do regret that we're sort of devolving into what Taylor said, where you do have like Valley Girls on the bridge. I don't even know what to call them, but they certainly don't seem like people from the 24th century who've achieved any kind of emotional maturity. And they really stuck in their feelings. But I think I can be critical about the show without being sort of hateful of it. But one of the things that's really heartbreaking about the way modern Star Trek is conducted is that it is really no longer about an ensemble. And I think that was something we got a lot of in the first series. We see it in the follow-ups in the 80s and 90s. There's a rotating cast of characters, and you get to see their interior lives, their struggles, how they relate with each other as a family. But I think modern Star Trek is trying to create more of a star, someone who kind of takes the center stage, does most of the heroic thinking and the heroic actions, and you don't get to know as many people in that world in a way that you probably should. But that's my opinion, and anyone could definitely challenge me on that on the board. And yeah, just wanted to put that out.
Yeah, it's funny. In one of no, I will get there in a few years. Merv, let me have your thoughts on this article.
So I feel a little less qualified just because my
Understood, but
Star Trek fandom goes back about 3 months. But
Welcome aboard.
I will say that I don't think the problems that seem to be expressed in this article are that there's this 50-year-old franchise, or however long it's been, that is trying to maintain its place and relevancy. And in a current era of TV, which is, it feels like a minefield a little bit. Like, there are really good stuff that goes unwatched, and then there's really bad stuff that nobody sees, and then there's like, it's a weird time for TV. I think there's no, I don't want to say there's a lack of structure to it, but everyone's getting their TV on their own pace, and it's kind of a weird thing for, I think, studios and things like that to get a hold on. Like, how do we deliver this, and how do we know that it's successful, and how do we even target people? Because there's so many different ways. It's not just like you can change the channel. It's like you have to get a whole nother app, because there's so many apps now that this thing's on that and this thing's on that, and everyone's so spread out, which as a person who can nitpick their budget is very good for the consumer. But it's also like, I think it's an awkward time for TV, or it's a transitional time for TV, one of the two. But like you guys, I have to agree with you guys, even though I haven't, obviously seen 90% of the Star Trek stuff. Comparing it to anything else that has been everlasting, Star Wars or the Marvel, even at this point, or comic books in general, or anything like that, they all run into the same problem. And it's like, well, how do we get the new batch of? We have these 50-year-olds. How do we get the 10-year-olds so that 50 years from now we're not out of business? And it's, you just tell the same stories, you just update them, not same exact, but same formula, more or less. Like, there's a reason things become popular, and that doesn't necessarily change structurally, I don't think. Like, it's like you said, you just write them better and give them better graphics and maybe better sequences, but it's all just, there has to be a better effort. Than you can't just throw any old thing out there. That's how you die. But you just gotta put a good product out there. That's all. It sounds so simple whenever I say it. Just make a good thing, and people will watch it.
You said TV is scattered, but I was immediately thinking there are two shows that had huge traction in the last 5 years, which were very popular, and people seem to be watching them all the time. At least from my point of view, there are probably more, but I'm talking about Ted Lasso on Apple TV, and I'm talking about The Last of Us on HBO Max. Those two were highly successful. And you know what the common ground of a comedy show about an American coaching European football in England, and a show about a zombie apocalypse has? You know what the one thing is that unites those two things? Good writing. And that's it. That's what people need to do. Write good stories, and people will watch it, and people will talk about it, and it will be successful. And that is not action or making characters that have been around for 15 years all of a sudden married to an alien. Anyway. Yeah. That will conclude.
Spock has a sister? What?
Yeah, exactly. Stuff like that. That will conclude this month's episode of the Star Trek Project. We hope you have enjoyed our discussion today. If you did, you can help us out. Like and share this review, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you really want more of us, you can join our forum at sakar.freeforums.net. We would love it if you do that. Episode 5 of the Star Trek Project, we will be discussing Star Trek: The Motion Picture. We will also make a seasonal review for X-Men 97, currently running on Disney Plus in a few weeks, and in a few months we will be making a review series for the Epcalite. So be on the lookout for all of that. For now, I want to thank you all also on behalf of our champions and wish you to live long and prosper. Bye.